Okay, for people joining this live stream, we are a bit late here. We are talking about de-experimentalizing functions in Wolfram Language. This is the part of a long series of meetings. Also today, we have a lot of live stream meetings about different things. But we're going to start with this. So the question is, should we be committing to these functions forever? And we are looking at these. Okay, for WebImage search, I've already said I would like to change the default.
Yes, we already did it. So we need to push a new backlit and update the documentation, but we already have that working locally.
Okay. What about is there a second argument? And should we allow something that just says WebImage search of tiger, 10 to get 10 tigers as an elision of the syntax?
So we're currently using max items for that, and that should be a third argument because the second one is the element you want to get, right?
No, I understand that, but one thing that is a syntax elision we sometimes make is is to simply put a number in that second argument. I'm not sure how important that is. All right, we can leave that out for now. Okay, I think this design is okay. I think it doesn't need to be experimental. The only concern, yeah, okay, and we have our various mechanisms for other people's terms of use and for service credit to flow through. That's all working smoothly. Is that correct?
Yeah, and also we are adding, since we are removing this default data set and we're returning the thumbnails, we are adding a new element that is called dataset that returns what it's returning right now.
Good. Okay. Okay, and you should leave the thumbnails thing as the explicit version of what automatic is doing. Okay, I don't see a problem with de-experimentalizing that. Web search, I think I feel the same way about. Although I don't know how much people, how much. You know, a separate issue is we have some dependency on external vendors for these things at this time. That will probably continue for web search. It might not continue for web image search. Well, let me look at what else you're proposing here. Yeah, Wikipedia search has the problem that it isn't following the design pattern of the other search functions, is it?
Right.
And do we have a proposed design to fix that or not?
Not right now. We never work a lot on designing this. Our attention was more focused on Wikipedia data. That's been working fine for the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years.
Right. Okay, but in the search thing, there was an attempt to make the text search and Wikipedia search, and I think several other search and web search, right? You know what? Hold on a second. Hold on just a moment. I don't understand how we can de-experimentalize these. You know, given that text search, we still don't have a clear pattern for let's see. We don't have a clear pattern for what the tagging of different types is, like what we have in Wikipedia search, where there's title, etc., right?
Well, we want to talk about returning a search result object, but I don't know what happened with that.
Okay, you know what? Let's not de-experimentalize these things. Sorry.
There's also mail search and resource search, so maybe at some point you have to look at all the search.
Well, we have been looking at all of them. We had a series of meetings to look at all of them, and somehow those meetings died off, but those need to be reinitiated.
in word search.
What's word search? What?
Word search is, what is it? Let's see.
I don't think it's anything.
Oh, it's an option. Okay.
Okay. Questions from our live stream. When deciding on experimental features, do we take into account usage statistics? Well, statistics about usage. Usually we, for privacy reasons, don't know anything about what people are specifically doing with functions. The only thing we can know is when they're calling an external API and we're counting how many calls they make. We wish we did know more. Actually, for some of our code assistant stuff, we'd love to have, and we may end up with some kind of data donor program where people are giving us, opting in to giving us more data about what they're actually doing. Because we would like to know statistics about people, particularly as they're typing code and making mistakes. We'd like to know what mistakes they're making and not making. Question is WebImage search free? Well, we wish it was. I mean, it's using an external image search API. Maybe one day we will have done our own web crawls and gotten our own images, but for the time being, we are relying on an external provider. So sadly, it's not.
I think there's two. Right? There's two external providers, right? There's Microsoft and Google. Yeah.
Yes. And I don't think we've actually investigated having an image-only web search provider, and perhaps we could do that. I'm not sure if there's because there are a number of services that just do image search. I don't know what their quality level is. I think that the web image search is, in many ways, for many of the uses people want, which is get me a bunch of sample pictures of tigers and things, is much less demanding than web search in terms of ranking. And so it's much more realistic that one can do a simpler job and still be very useful there. And it's something we are thinking about. Yeah, Brian is asking, how would web search be refined? Yeah, absolutely, restricting to particular sites, file types, etc. Yeah, I mean, we can pass through to those APIs both the things that consumers get to pass through, and I think there may be some other options that are available in the APIs that are not readily available to consumers, or a kind of messy syntax.
But we can already filter those things. So we have options for site and file type.
Do we have the options, or do we only have them as a?
Yeah, open the options. We have several things. I mean, I think you can specify some arbitrarily complex thing in the format of the external service, but there are also some normalized things that we support.
Right, but this is the search query string version. Right. I mean, this is again, we have got to go and look at all these search things together, because they have different behavior with respect to search query string, etc. Because that's dealing with, some things have wildcards, some things don't, some things use quotes in certain ways, etc. All right, I think that's all we can get to for, service request. Well, I don't think the tasks framework is going to stay experimental. I see no reason it should. Does anybody? I think we've got that in this collection. Does anybody here want to talk about the tasks framework? I mean, to me, the tasks framework seems like it's working fine. Anybody want to comment on that?
I think Constantine had reservations for tasks. That's
about what? Do we know?
He didn't explicitly say anything about it, but if it is...
Well, then let's get that on another de-experimentalization meeting, but let's remember that when we figure out the answer to that, it will affect service submit, service request. Fair? Raj, I think you can
yeah, I can relay that to Raj.
This is a mess. Since the whole service credits framework is changing, we definitely don't want to de-experimentalize that. All right, next item. Web window object. So I haven't used these enough to be sure about this, but Arnaud, I think you're here and you have been using these, right? WebExecute and so on.
Yeah, I think I think that's.
Have you been
fairly,
happy with them?
I think so, yeah.
And so if I looked at tests you've written, the code for those tests is civilized.
What does civilized mean there? You have
I
to
don't
start.
know. It doesn't. What's that? I mean, it doesn't have a lot of weird idioms in it. That's not what I wanted. I wanted to say.
You want to start a session?
No, I don't. But I want to say something like there's got to be a website at fish.com. We're about to find out what it is. What was that pink box that I saw there? Well, great. Okay.
Shell.com.
Okay, this could be very dangerous. Just going for all these random.com. Okay. Oh yeah, that of course. Yeah, that's a fine Dutch company. There you go, or something. Okay, so that worked fine. So my question about WebExecute is really about all of the kind of weird commands that are inside WebExecute.
I mean, I think that will expand over time. It may change over time, but it's not a, it's.
But it's always grandfatherable. It's your claim.
Yeah, I mean, like who knows, like 10 years from now, what's going to happen with web browsers and if things, like change significantly. But for now, I think this is a reasonable set of things to support.
Hello?
I mean, your basic point is web browsers. I mean, there's an analogy here, perhaps. I mean, let's look at things that we supported 30 years ago that relate to external stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And whether we're upset by them. I mean, we certainly had things for printer drivers, which are long lost now, but it didn't do us any harm to have them there, and they just quietly retire. I'm not sure there were built-in functions that had, we may have had one built-in function for that.
Yeah, we just don't know what's going to happen with, web browsers 10 or 15 years from now. So,
Well, I know, but except that we can have an expectation based on, I mean, the issue is, if web browsers go away, for example, then, but the question is this structure of having essentially key value pairs as a way to execute things is kind of messy. It's not really beautiful. It reminds me of what we need to do for the virtual machines that we're building, which supposedly, I don't know. It sounded like Christian was here. When am I finally going to see the Ethereum virtual machine code?
Johan is reviewing that and should ask for the meeting again soon.
I've been told that for like 3 or 4 months, if not 6 months. My question is, if we look at those virtual machines, right, that's another example of a virtual machine, right? Is the design that we are using for WebExecute, which is essentially like a virtual machine, compatible with the other things we plan for virtual machines? Did you understand my question?
Well, I understand the question, but I've not seen those other virtual machines, so I can't comment on that. I mean, the reason we're using strings and rules here is because, we don't want to have like 20 or 25 functions, at a top level function. So that was the reason, these actions were made, like strings with then, elements that they use. I mean, in the lower,
left experimental.
In the lower level code, they're all functions, right? There's a locate element function. So
yeah, we should leave it. I mean, look, WebImage seems to me pretty harmless. It's very similar to current screen image and so on. Yeah. I think it is pretty harmless.
I mean, we said de-experimentalize because we don't particularly plan to work on this for the next couple of years. I mean, this is maintenance mode.
But that's not an argument to do that. I mean, the fact is, these are things which are
I mean, ultimately, it's up to you. If you want to do another redesign of it, that's fine. But
we're not going to do it anytime soon. You're absolutely correct. I mean, unless the usage of it climbs dramatically, we find horrible problems with the current design, or but I think it is what we don't want to do is
And I think people are using it. I don't think there's major complaints about,
I understand that. I understand that, but there's no reason that the cost to leaving something experimental is not particularly high. I mean, it's going to become higher when we start certifying user APIs and refusing to do that when things are experimental. Then people are going to be more concerned about whether things are experimental or not. Right? And there may have to be some complicated negotiation about user APIs that make use of experimental functions, and where we will agree to certify them and guarantee that they'll stay compatible and such like. But I think, what on earth is this? What is this? This is the Python. What is that? Why is this considered experimental?
Well, it is experimental, and we want it to stay experimental until that's completely, done and dusted. And I wouldn't say that's completely a finished project or even a, finished design.
Why? Because of sandboxing or what?
Well,
not so much because of sandboxing. I mean, that's an implementation issue. I think the design. I mean, you skipped over all the external evaluate functions a minute ago when you scrolled down to the WebExecute stuff. We think that stuff, although it works fine, probably might need a little bit of redesign, especially things like external function, external object.
Yeah, we still plan to add more functions, which may affect the design. I think at some point, like we have enough languages where we say, okay, this is a good design. We don't expect, major surprises, but I don't think we have quite enough languages.
Well, I mean, your issue, for example, external function could work for languages like C and so on, which clearly external evaluate is not going to work for, at least not in any obvious way. I mean, look, to me, the more obvious thing that we need to do here is to assess, because the sooner we make, if we are going to need to change some design of external evaluate, the sooner we do that, the better.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's getting quite widely used. And so what is it exactly that you think you want to change?
Well, I think
one issue is, I mean, external function and external object both are not supported by a lot of languages. It's not clear if they're designed correctly, and especially it's not clear how. Eventually, we'll integrate external evaluate with JLink, for example. And I think until we've seen RLink and JLink, how they integrate with external evaluate, it's going to be hard to get the design for these things right.
Yeah, I think external value, external object, these are all kind of complicated.
Yes. Right. And so we thought we'd just treat the whole suite and leave it as experimental instead of trying to pick and choose a few functions that we can de-experimentalize.
Okay. What is this? Why is SSH authentication? Why is that something that is still deeply experimental? What is there that needs to be done here? Can somebody speak to that?
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Who put it in there? Who made this statement here? Well, we don't know. So, Raj, this needs to come. You need to. How about you get these signed, please?
So Raj is out today.
Okay. Well, so in future, can we make sure that these statements get signed so we don't have nobody knows who wrote this situation?
Yeah. I can let them know.
Okay. Let's go on. Let's see whether there's anything that we can quickly do, because there's clearly a lot of stuff here that's a whole complicated story. Synthetic geometry. Oops. What is that? What is synthetic geometry? Oh, it's a guide page. Okay, angle bisector simply evaluates and gives a primitive. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
I really wish people wouldn't use these microscopic, weird script characters in documentation, but that's just a pet peeve. Okay. So let's see. What other things here? These are all of the. Is Roger in this meeting? Does he have comments on these?
He is not in this meeting.
Okay. I don't understand why midpoint returns this value here. Oh, I see. Midpoint. I get it. Midpoint of just the naked coordinates returns naked coordinates. How does that work for angle bisector? If you feed it in here, you're giving naked coordinates, yet you're getting out a line object. How can that be consistent?
Well, I mean, the angle bisector, there's nothing else we can really return besides an infinite line, whereas for midpoint, if the user puts in the naked coordinates, they get out a naked coordinates, but if they put in
Sorry, you broke up. We couldn't hear you.
Things point.
We know for midpoint you're getting out. If you put in points, you get out points. But for angle bisector, if you put in naked coordinates, you're getting out.
You always get out an infinite line.
Right. That's odd.
It's really the only choice.
Why? Why isn't it a unit vector or something?
We need it to represent the angle bisector in a geometric
could work. It's inside a geometric scene. We it jives better with the inside a geometric scene where we can we actually draw infinite lines, but we don't support vectors inside of geometric scene.
Okay, this is not going to fly yet. By the way, I'm noticing on our live stream all kinds of comments here.
The other nice thing about infinite line is it doesn't matter which way the angle is oriented.
I understand. I'm not buying this completely. I mean, I'm buying it if you feed into angle bisector a thing that is a wrapped symbolic geometric object, then getting infinite line out makes sense. If you feed in something which is just a bunch of naked coordinates, it is much less obvious to me that that makes sense. And for your purposes in geometric scene, you only care about the case where you're feeding in properly wrapped symbolic objects. Right?
Sorry, my internet connection cut out.
Okay, then we have to do this a different time. Okay, let me just look ahead here and see whether there are other things here which are more obvious. Yeah, these can be de-experimentalized. These are really well, unless somebody is what is being complained here about here. I mean, the question of what it is using internally, where does it even say what it does there? Where did this come from?
We are using, that's my comment. We are using MX files for various stuff we store, but when you given them MX file, what do you do with it? It's not clear whether it's encrypted or something else.
What are you talking about? I mean, the encrypt file is using encryption. What it is doing on how it is representing the underlying expression, I would have expected it to use binary serialize for the underlying expression.
Yes, I'm talking about how it stores the encrypted file.
Stores it where?
In MX file, which is a generic container.
Wait. It's not an MX file. I don't understand. If I say encrypt file,
it is.
Okay, we cannot de-experimentalize this. This is a total mess then. That doesn't make any sense.
We need to consider MX files in how we use them everywhere.
Okay, this meeting is not going well. Okay. And we're going to have to wrap because we've got another live stream about it's about image and video formats. coming up in just a few minutes here. But I'd like to, okay, this is not, okay. Look, these things, the good news is these were experimental. Have we agreed to de-experimentalize anything in this meeting? Okay, nobody even knows. So I think the answer is, I think we said WebImage could be de-experimentalized, but let's not do that because we're doing this in too rushed a way. This is a horrible mess, a lot of this stuff.
So before we put web image search and web search back into the de-experimentalization meetings, maybe we can have a search meeting to talk about the design for that overall.
Okay, okay. Yeah, this is a total mess, this stuff here. There's no way we're de-experimentalizing this yet. Okay, some comments to people on the live stream. Brian wants to know, does WebExecute default to HTTPS or HTTP? How does one specify the default?
I'll try to answer that offline. I'm looking at the code right now. I don't know offhand.
Well, it's bad that you have to look at the code to answer that. So we obviously need, I mean...
yeah, I mean, most people, I would recommend just specifying it yourself as a user. So, if you want to use HTTP, you specify it like that. If you want to use HTTPS, you specify it like that.
But in other words,
I don't think it's
a defaulting.
Yeah, sure. But
so
I mean, if it's URL built, it's HTTPS.
And it's also sometimes, even if you put in HTTP, it is not necessarily HTTP because, for example, Google will redirect you to HTTPS.
Right. But there is a default we use, and I'm trying to look it up, but I haven't found
the standard now from Google and Firefox is HTTPS, libcurl, which is another standard.
I agree the default should be HTTPS. But
all right, so
yes, it is HTTPS.
Okay, thank you.
External evaluate should support C#, says Brian. How can it? It's not an interpretable language, is it? I mean, external function could support C#.
I think there's a REPL for C#.
I see. Boy, that's amazing.
And even if there isn't, we'll have external function.
Yeah, external function is a different thing. Ali is saying, remove functions, don't leave them hanging. Either keep working on them or remove them completely. I don't think people would like that. This is one of the challenges. I'm going to expound on this just for a minute, for everybody's sake. I mean, in areas that are not well developed, like supporting, I don't know, fancy features of controlling web browsers, we can say, well, we're just not going to do it. We can say we'll have something in the function repository, maybe now. I mean, that's a new option for us. Or we can have something that we're pretty sure is going to be stable, but it's not going to be as stable as something like NestList or something, where it'll never change. And so that's what we've invented this experimental mechanism for. Now, it is possible that as we have more experimental functions, that we should have shades of experimentalization, or that we should have commentary in the documentation about why something is experimental. But it is, unfortunately, finishing a design can be a lot of work. It can involve stuff we simply don't know, that depends on how the world develops, or how or how people choose to use things we can't foresee, and that's why we need this experimental stuff. But I consider it a good solution to an ugly problem of how do we deliver functionality years earlier than it could be incredibly polished. And the question of whether it is the right prioritization once we have delivered a preliminary version of something as an experimental form to keep working on that thing as opposed to other things, I tend to think that it's better to put some of these things out there and see what happens and see how people use them, see whether they find them useful, see whether there are awkward corners that they keep on running into. I mean, like, for example, the web image search, thumbnails being the default. I wouldn't have necessarily said that on day one. I only say that because I've used it hundreds of times or more, and I pretty much always use that option. Yes, Ali on a live stream is saying, use them. We'd love to have polished, finished functions. Believe me, we are doing our best to make that the case. But it is challenging when the world changes and when we're sort of building on a foundation of sand, because we're trying to connect to something externally in the world. I mean, it's a completely different story when we've got purely internal functions. Like angle bisector, we should be able to nail how that works because that's only under our control. With something like external evaluate or WebExecute, it's a little bit of a different story. Have there been experimental functions, Sander asks, that have been killed afterwards? The answer is yes. Although I'm not sure I can quote. I mean, we've definitely changed things in experimental functions. We've had some which have changed name or been just completely killed. It is not a common phenomenon. Okay, so Ali is suggesting that there's a different color that is used when one uses an experimental function, and that is something we might consider. I just don't know. The problem is it's very personality dependent for people. I mean, there are people who will use, we see this in code bases, in Wolfram Language code bases. There are people who will use things which we just tell them that's, you're using something that is a completely undocumented behavior. That's a bad idea. And people will say, but it works. And therefore they'll use it. I think that there's kind of a lint-like process that needs to go on of saying, look, and maybe the right answer to this is when we introduce our new level of code assistance, that one of the things, and this is something we should be making a note of, that something that can be returned as part of that code assistance is information on what functions that you are using are experimental. I think that's that's more of a pick off the lint detail question, I think, rather than something that's in your face, because I think that typically these functions, we don't make functions experimental, lightly. They're made that way because that's the only way we could get functionality in there this year rather than several years from now. Brian is saying he likes the idea of documenting why a function is experimental. I like that too. And I think it will be worth putting in there, that it's experimental. I mean, so what would we say, for example, for some of these? WebExecute, we could write the small essay about why WebExecute is experimental that basically explains that we're not sure that this mechanism for taking, that this will agree with our general virtual machine mechanism and so on. I don't know whether other people in this meeting, it's probably the wrong meeting to really go through the discussion of documenting the reasons for something being experimental, but does anybody have a quick reaction to that? No. All right. Listen, we should. So one long comment here. Let's see. There's questions here about support for Julia. I believe that's coming in 12.1. Todd, can you confirm that?
Yeah, that's coming in 12.1. I replied.
Okay.
Already.
Okay, Brian is suggesting that the experimental unsupported function should be flagged as part of the publishing process if you cloud publish an API, for example. Yeah, I think that should be part of the whole code assistance story. Actually, and Ali is suggesting a checkbox in preferences that enables highlighting experimental functions. That's an interesting idea. I'm not sure. Hopefully we'd at least have one user of that. I think that's an interesting idea, and maybe that could be put. Who is taking notes here?
Me, Devin.
Okay, so that's something for the probably the code assistance meeting.
Sure.
Ethan is mentioning that if we support all these things like Python and notebooks, we should have syntax coloring. We are well aware of this issue. It is being worked on. We think we have a solution. We just need to not have to. We need to have something which is a general solution rather than a specific solution. And we think we have one, and it's possible that it will make it into 12.1. All right, so listen, for those who are into live streams, we are about to do another one. We will be taking about a 5-minute break, and then we will be doing image, video, and import-export features for 12.1. So stay tuned, and we probably need to, can we bring up in the product release meeting next week the whole question of what's happening with this de-experimentalization process? And it would have been good if Raj was here. Hopefully he'll be there for that. Okay?
Yep.
Okay, see y'all soon.